Two giants of the 19th century stand face to face. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator who saved the American Union, and Karl Marx, the philosopher who predicted the rise of the working class. They lived in the same era, but viewed freedom through very different lenses. Tonight, the debate begins with the definition of slavery itself.
Mr. President, allow me to begin by repeating what I wrote to you in 1864 on behalf of the International Working Men's Association. We congratulated you on your re-election because we understood that your war against the slaveholders was a holy war for the rights of labor. By destroying slavery in the South, you cleared the path for the working class everywhere.
I recall your letter with gratitude, Mr. Marx. It was a dark time, and friends of the Union in Europe were scarce. We paid a terrible price in blood to prove that a nation conceived in liberty could endure. We struck the chains from 4 million human beings because we believe that if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong.
You removed the chains of iron, yes, and for that history honors you. But I must ask you to look at the chains of gold that remain. You ended chattel slavery, where one man owns another, but you left wage slavery intact. In your northern factories, a man is free only in name. If he does not sell his labor to a capitalist for a few coins, he starves. Is that true liberty?
There is a vast difference between a slave and a hired laborer. The slave is driven to work by the lash. The hired laborer is driven by the hope of bettering his condition. The hired laborer works by consent. He is free to quit. He is free to strike out on his own. Our system of free labor opens the way to all, giving hope to all, and energy and progress and improvement of condition to all.
You speak of consent, but is it consent when the alternative is death by hunger? The worker owns nothing but his hands. The capitalist owns the machines, the factories, and the land. The worker is forced by necessity to accept whatever wage is offered. You call it a free contract. I call it coercion disguised as law. The slave owner buys the man. The capitalist buys the man's life, hour by hour.
I cannot agree that the condition of the laborer is fixed. I myself was a hired laborer, splitting rails and working on a flatboat. I did not remain one. In a just and generous system, the penniless beginner labors for wages a while, saves a surplus, buys tools or land for himself, and then labors on his own account. This is the American path. We do not believe in a permanent class of laborers.
That is a noble story, Mr. President, but it is becoming a fairy tale. You speak of an America that is vanishing. As industry grows, the tools become too expensive for a worker to buy. Giant corporations are rising that will swallow the small man. The path up is being blocked. You have replaced the plantation lord with the factory tycoon, and the logic of exploitation remains the same.
I am not blind to the greed of men, nor the power of money. But the remedy is not to destroy the system that allows a man to eat the bread his own hands have earned. The remedy is to protect that right through law. Liberty is the right to choose your own path, even if that path is hard. I would rather be a free man facing a storm than a well-fed prisoner in a cage.
You ended our last exchange by praising the free man who masters his own fate. But, Mr. President, this is a myth used to keep the poor quiet. In the modern industrial age, the storm is a hurricane of capital. You believe any man can rise from poverty to wealth solely by hard work. I say the ladder is broken. A man cannot climb when the rungs are owned by someone else.
I am not speaking of myths, Mr. Marx. I am speaking of my own life. I was born in a log cabin with a dirt floor. I had less than a year of schooling. I split rails. I clerked in a store. I happened, temporarily, to occupy this White House. I am a living witness that any one of your children may look to come here as my father's child has. That is the promise of America.
Your story is inspiring, truly. But I fear you represent an era that is dying. You rose in a world of small farms and shops. Today, the tools of production, the steam engines, the blast furnaces, cost millions. A rail splitter cannot buy a steel mill. A class of permanent wage earners is being formed who will never own the factory they work in. The system is rigged against the newcomer.
I do not believe in a permanent class of hired laborers. To ensure that the path remains open, we passed the Homestead Act. We offered 160 acres of public land to any man, citizen or immigrant, who is willing to farm it. We gave the people a stake in their country. If the factory does not treat a man well, he can pack his wagon and go west to be his own master.
The Homestead Act was a revolutionary step, I admit. It delayed the crisis. But the frontier is finite, Mr. President. The land will run out. And the future belongs to industry, not farming. In the cities, the dynamic is inescapable. Capital attracts capital. The big business swallows the small business. It is a mathematical inevitability that wealth concentrates in fewer hands.
You see the dark side of the coin. I see the light. Wealth is not a zero-sum game. If one man gets rich, it does not mean another must get poor. The man who builds a factory creates jobs for 100 others. We do not wage war on capital. We simply insist that labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration. We want the worker to eventually become a capitalist himself.
Eventually is a long time to wait while your children are hungry. You say labor is superior, yet in your courts, property rights are held more sacred than human rights. The system rewards the ownership of money, not the expenditure of sweat. A man who moves money makes millions. A man who moves rocks breaks his back. How can a self-made man compete with inherited millions?
By education and grit. We founded land-grant colleges to teach agriculture and mechanics to the common man. We believe that if you give a man knowledge and freedom, he will find his way. Yes, some start with more, but in a free society, ability and effort are the great equalizers. I would rather trust the ambition of the individual than the charity of the state.
Ambition cannot overthrow arithmetic, Mr. President. When a corporation becomes a monopoly, it dictates wages, prices, and lives. The individual worker standing alone against a giant trust is not free, he is crushed. You are trying to apply the logic of a village market to the reality of a global industrial machine. It will not hold. In your republic, money is becoming the new monarch.
I am not naive to the dangers of wealth. In fact, shortly before my death, I wrote a letter expressing a grave concern. I said, corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign until all liberty is lost. I see the storm coming, Mr. Marx, but I believe the Constitution is strong enough to weather it.
You see the storm, but you refuse to build a shelter. You believe the state can control the corporations. I say, The corporations are the state. In a capitalist society, the government is merely the executive committee for the rich. They buy the newspapers, they buy the senators, they buy the laws. Democracy becomes a mask for the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. A worker's vote counts for one. A tycoon's dollar counts for 1,000,000.
That is a cynical view of the human spirit. It is true that money talks, but the ballot box speaks louder if the people are awake. If the people find that the corporations are becoming tyrants, they have the power to amend the laws, to tax, to regulate. The beauty of our system is that it is self-correcting. We do not need to burn the house down to fix a leaking roof. We repair it.
And how long must the people wait for repairs while the rain pours in? How many generations must suffer in poverty while you regulate? History moves by leaps, not by slow shuffling. The slave owners did not give up their slaves because of a vote. They gave them up because of a bloody war. Why do you think the captains of industry will be any different? They will not give up their profits without a fight.
Because we learn the terrible cost of that fight. 600,000 dead. I would rather trust the slow, messy, frustrating process of democracy than the swift, bloody certainty of a revolution. When you unleash violence, Mr. Marx, you cannot control it. It consumes the just and the unjust alike. Look at the terror in France. We seek a more perfect union through law, not through the guillotine.
You fear the violence of revolution, but you ignore the quiet violence of the status quo. Hunger is violence. Eviction is violence. A child working in a coal mine is violence. You accept this systemic violence because it is legal. We simply want to end it. You call it class war. We call it self-defense. The society is already divided into two hostile camps. We are just revealing the truth.
I deny that society must be divided into hostile camps. I do not believe in a necessary conflict between capital and labor. They should be partners. The man who holds the ladder is just as important as the man who climbs it. If we turn American against American, class against class, we destroy the very freedom we seek to preserve. A house divided against itself cannot stand, whether divided by slavery or by class hatred.
A house divided is a poetic phrase, Mr. Lincoln, but it ignores the reality. The house must fall so a new one can be built. You believe in patching the cracks. I believe the foundation is rotten. History does not move by slow, polite steps. It moves by leaps, by revolutions. The ballot box is too slow for the starving child. Violence is the midwife of every old society, pregnant with a new one.
I have seen the midwife of violence, and she brings forth monsters as often as she brings forth liberty. Look at the French Revolution. They sought equality through the guillotine and ended up with an emperor. I believe that among free men, there can be no successful appeal from the ballot to the bullet. If the people want change, they have the vote. To destroy the law to achieve justice is to build a house on sand.
But what if the law itself is the injustice? Look at the Paris Commune of 1871. For a brief, shining moment, the workers governed themselves. It was true democracy, not the sham you have in Washington, where lawyers speak for bankers. Yes, it was crushed by the army, but it showed the world that the working class is capable of ruling. We do not need masters.
The commune was crushed because it rejected the rule of law for the rule of the mob. You speak of a dictatorship of the proletariat. I tell you, any dictatorship is a tyranny, whether it is by a king, a general, or a committee of workers. My dream is not to replace one master with another, but to have no masters at all. That is why we say, as I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master.
You fear the word dictatorship, but you live in one. The dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The rich dictate the wages, the hours, and the prices. We simply want to turn the tables. We want to abolish private property, because property is the source of this power. When everyone owns everything, no one can exploit anyone. That is the end of history.
To abolish private property is to abolish the very nature of man. Property is the fruit of labor. Property is desirable. It is a positive good in the world. That some should be rich shows that others may become rich, and hence is just encouragement to industry and enterprise. We do not wish to destroy the rich. We wish to elevate the poor so they may become rich.
A society of universal capitalists is a mathematical impossibility. For one to have profit, another must have loss. Your system requires a permanent underclass to function. You offer hope as a painkiller, while the disease of inequality eats the patient alive. The future belongs to the collective, Mr. President, not the individual. The machine has made individualism obsolete.
If the machine destroys the individual, then we must master the machine, not surrender to it. I may be old-fashioned, Mr. Marx, but I still believe that the individual soul is the most precious thing on earth. I would rather be a free man in a messy democracy, struggling to improve my lot, than a well-fed cog in a giant state machine. Liberty is the right to be responsible for oneself.
Mr. President, we have argued long into the night. You offer noble sentiments, but history is not shaped by sentiments. It is shaped by material forces. You saved the Union, and for that you are a giant. But I predict that the very forces you unleashed, industrial capitalism, will soon threaten the liberty you cherish. The war for the Union is over. The war for the soul of humanity is just beginning.
I do not fear the future, Mr. Marx, for I trust the people. Yes, new tyrants may rise, whether they be kings or corporations. But in America, we have planted a seed that cannot be unrooted. The idea that all men are created equal. It is a standard to which we can always repair. We are not perfect, sir, but we have the mechanism to become a more perfect union. That is the genius of democracy.
Democracy is fragile when it rests on inequality. A new aristocracy of money is rising in your land that will make the old slaveholders look like paupers. You trust the vote. I trust the struggle. Time will tell which of us was the true prophet. Will the world belong to the billionaire or to the worker? The specter of revolution is still haunting the world.
Let it haunt. Specters vanish in the light of morning. I believe the American experiment will survive because it adapts. We stumbled, we bled, but we kept moving forward. Freedom is not a destination, Mr. Marx. It is a constant, wearying march. And as long as the people have the courage to march, they will never be slaves to any master, be it a king, a cotton lord, or a factory boss.
You place a heavy burden on the shoulders of the individual. I hope, for the sake of the millions who suffer, that your faith is justified. But if your system fails them, If the ballot box remains deaf to their cries, then do not be surprised when they reach for the hammer and the sickle instead of the pen.
If that day comes, it will be because we forgot who we are. But I have faith we will remember. We fought to prove that right makes might. Violence may tear down a palace, but it cannot build a home. Only the slow, hard work of self-government can do that.
Then let history judge. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. We shall see which method changes it for the better. Your law or my revolution.
Indeed, we shall see. I leave you with this. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. It shall live, not because it is perfect, but because it is right.
Two visions of the future, one rooted in the hope of reform, the other in the fire of revolution. The debate continues in our world today. Which path do you believe in? If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, you will love our episode on Julius Caesar versus Napoleon. Click the video on your screen now to watch. Who should be our next guests? Tell us in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support Dialogue with History.